This is Rising from the Shadows. What would your life look like if you stopped second-guessing yourself, stopped playing small, and finally broke free from the cycles that have kept you stuck? Well, that's what the Ignite Momentum Practicum is all about. It's a 6-week transformational coaching experience designed to help you break through people-pleasing, self-doubt, and codependency once and for all. And here's the best part. You get to choose your path. You can matriculate through the one-on-one accelerator. It's private, high-touch coaching, you and me one-on-one. Weekly breakthrough calls, a custom action plan, deep mindset work, and real-time support to help you reclaim your power and rebuild your confidence. Option 2 is the group intensive. This is where transformation meets community. Weekly live sessions with a cohort of like-minded individuals, hot seat coaching, Q&A, bonus trainings, and a space where you're truly seen and supported without judgment. So whether you want personalized guidance or collective energy, the Ignite Momentum Practicum gives you the tools, structure, and support to stop circling the same patterns and start building unstoppable momentum. Ready to take the next step? Schedule your momentum call now at ignitingmomentum.co. That's ignitingmomentum.co. Michael, welcome to the show.
Marlon, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I have been following you for a little bit now on your TikTok page, and I was immediately sucked in with your raw authenticity, your storytelling, and just you being vulnerable with sharing what you've learned from your situation. Before I get into my questions that I have, I'd like to just give you the opportunity to share. How did you get to where you are today, and who did you have to become to get here?
That's we doing 1 hour or two, Marlon.
I know.
A lot of what I dealt with in the aftermath of being discarded was a sense of disbelief. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of anger. There's a feeling of betrayal. But I think that it can be hard to really understand not only the severity of what happened. Like, I don't think I had any concept when it happened that what I had just experienced was traumatizing. I didn't get diagnosed with PTSD for almost 1.5 years after.
Same. I actually, even though I've been in treatment for anxiety and depression, I just was officially diagnosed with complex PTSD last month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
See, now I don't believe that mine is complex PTSD. I believe essentially the entirety of my trauma is rooted in the discard. I think that my relationship was interesting in the sense that it lasted 2.5 years. And while there were behaviors and patterns that sort of got worse toward the end, it's almost like we weren't together quite long enough, or maybe it's because we never cohabitated, that a lot of those behaviors never really reached the extreme sort of Jekyll and Hyde point that they reached right at the very end, right before the discard. So there was this like about a week period where her behavior just got like very, very extreme. One day I would talk to her, she would be like raging angry. The next day I would talk to her, she'd act like she was totally fine and nothing happened.
Right.
The day after I would talk to her, she'd be crying, sobbing.
Yeah.
And it was just this extreme oscillation of emotions. And then it was just like very suddenly ending the relationship. And then in the process, sort of like completely dehumanizing me and devaluing me as a person and a partner. And that just kind of struck me. Like, I had this intuitive sense that this was not normal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had been through a divorce, and I was like, my ex-wife and I, like, we were still really kind to each other through the process,
Mm-hmm.
and we were amicable after the divorce. And here's this person who, for our entire relationship, showered me with love and praise and gratitude. And now she's acting like I was always this horrible person. And I'm just kind of like, where is all this coming from?
Right.
And what made it even more confusing is that it wasn't grounded in anything. Like, nothing had happened to trigger all this.
Yeah.
And so much of what I dealt with in that first year and a half was just the overwhelming grief. And in this case, it was, I think that if it had just been her, I probably would have moved on, or I don't like to say moved on, but I think I would have healed much more quickly. But during those 2.5 years, she had really brought me into the lives of her 3 young children. And I had bonded very closely with all of them. Her youngest daughter called me daddy. And it was just like this extreme and sudden disconnection from them as well. And coincidentally, I was coaching her son's soccer team. That's her oldest child. And she broke up with me like right before the season started. And I had to make this really difficult decision where it's like, do I step down from coaching when, like, I was just at the coaches meeting at the YMCA and they're like, if you know any coaches, like, send them our way. We're like dozens short and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I can't just quit because I'm going to let down a dozen kids, not just my ex's son. And so for those few months, she would bring the kids to the game. I mean, they would just like run to me and like cry and hug me and all this stuff. And like, I also got this sense that they were suffering and that she was not addressing their feelings as well. And that was like another layer of hurt to see all of their pain going unaddressed. And so I kind of went through sort of like this long period of just learning to cope with all these overwhelming emotions, learning how to sort of just navigate that space. And that's a big part of what my trauma therapist helped me do. And then the diagnosis of PTSD was a huge change because because the first thing I thought was, well, like the way she said it, she listened to me talk about all the things that I was experiencing. And she just she puts her hand on her heart and she says, Michael, everything that you have told me is a symptom of PTSD.
Yeah.
What you have experienced is relational trauma. And when she said that, it's like the wheels started turning and I was like, trauma does not come from normal, healthy relationships.
Right.
It comes from abuse, period.
Yeah.
And so that's when I was like, I think that this abusive behavior didn't just suddenly appear at the end. There had to have been patterns leading into it. Even if what happened at the end was the primary trauma, there still had to be all these other things. And so that's when I started really diving deep, learning about the cycle of abuse, learning about the sort of like cluster B traits. And that,
for
like,
people
just
who are listening and don't understand what cluster B traits are, can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so cluster B is I mainly think when with regarding to abuse, you kind of have the big three, which are borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and antisocial or psychopathy, APD. And essentially, borderline sort of presents as a like really intense emotional dysregulation, very like hot and cold. I always think there was a song that came out in like the 2000s, like the aughts, and the lyrics went, I love you, I hate you, I can't live without you. You know what I'm talking about? I was like, that's the borderline anthem.
Wait, what? No.
Is it Flida?
Oh man. I can't think of it now, but I
I
literally was
know you
listening
know
it
the
this
melody.
weekend. I was at my friend's house and we were talking about old music, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and then narcissistic personality presents as more control and more sort of covert manipulation that sort of happens over a longer period. And then I personally think, this is just kind of my judgment, but when I hear especially women talking about having been with men, like one of the women I follow on TikTok was strangled and beaten to the point of having a subcranial hematoma, after which her husband imprisoned her in their house for about a week, where she was drifting in and out of consciousness. And when I hear those kinds of things, I'm like, that's not narcissism, that's psychopathy.
Right, right.
That just absolute
That
erosion of
goes
empathy. That
beyond control. It goes beyond manipulation. That
it's
battery.
absolute
It's
cruel.
yes, it's cruel. It's yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I learned about something recently that I really feel like is a better characterization of what I experienced than trying to say like borderline or narcissism, because I don't really believe that people really fit neatly into these kinds of categories. It's more of a sort of a
It's a
cluster
spectrum.
B
Yeah.
spectrum. Yeah, absolutely. But vulnerable dark triad. When I heard that, vulnerable dark triad is borderline vulnerable narcissism and secondary psychopathy, which is basically psychopathy that's based on trauma rather than genetic traits.
Hmm.
And when I see that, I think about, like what are some of the antisocial behaviors? What are some of the narcissistic behaviors? What are some of the borderline oriented behaviors that my partner engaged in? And it's just like, oh, that's totally it. But I sort of see abuse as abuse is characterized by that cycle: idealize, devalue, discard.
Yeah.
And that's something that I really try to hammer home in my videos. Like it was
That is
actually my
not a
mom one.
thing. It's a
It
pattern
is
of
not a thing.
things. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's really important to understand, because a lot of positive seeming behaviors like idealization, they're showering you with love. I want to see you all the time. You're just so amazing. You're the most wonderful person I've ever met. Our whole lives were leading to us meeting and being together. That kind of stuff like makes you feel really seen and valued,
Mhm.
but it's super toxic. It doesn't feel toxic in the moment. It doesn't give you that like twist in your stomach
Because it
that
fills a
the
hole that's in you already and that needs to be filled. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So I think when people when people are stuck in um that cycle of abuse, um wait, sorry, I totally lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
Um um no, oh, I was going to say that it's learning that that cycle of abuse that is really what enables you to parse out, like, okay, this wasn't just a circumstantial behavior. Like I always say that if your partner comes home after a long day and they're stressed out and they throw a little tantrum and take it out on you,
Hmm.
like, that's negative behavior. It's unhealthy. It's not constructive.
Hmm.
And it's the kind of thing that if it persists and doesn't change, it can end a relationship. But it's not abuse.
Right.
It's circumstantial. And maybe that shows a lack of emotional maturity. Maybe that shows an inability to handle stress. Maybe that shows a lack of kindness or compassion, but it's not abuse.
Hmm.
Abuse invariably follows that cycle of idealize, devalue, discard. And so when I started deconstructing my relationship, going back through, months and years of texts and
Yeah.
just thinking back through some of our conflicts and situations. And it was just like this huge epiphany where I just sat there going, "Oh my God."
Yeah.
Like this pattern was here from the beginning of the relationship. I could see where she idealized me. I could see the devaluation behavior starting to creep in. And it's just that over a very long period of time, they just
Hmm.
escalated until they culminated in this um, extreme devaluation and discarding.
I really resonated with what you said, that towards the end, it just became like more bizarre. And, we're talking about that, we'll say people on the narcissistic spectrum, um, it's all about control for them, entitlement, control, what have you. And I recognize the same thing, like over like the course of 3 months before I decided to walk away. It ramped up, and it wasn't because there was always like a 3 months good, 1 month bad, 2 months bad, 6 months good, 9 months, three,
Mhm,
six,
mhm,
nine were like interesting numbers for me, like where things would be good, things would be bad, etc.
mhm.
Um, but when I didn't know it then, but when I became more aware, I guess, of my worth and started leaning into that again. It wasn't something like today I'm going to try to speak up. It just invariably
Right.
started happening. and everything got worse. And it's just like a mixture of throwing everything, all the controlling techniques, and hoping one of them sticks, right?
Right.
You know, the arguing and the yelling at you. If that doesn't work, or maybe it's the crying. If that doesn't work, you know, maybe it's the ignoring. If that doesn't work, maybe it's pretending that nothing ever happened. It's just like, let me throw everything on the
And
wall and see if it sticks.
I feel like that's, I recognize that as well. And I feel like because I noticed a lot of the same kinds of extreme behaviors, and they were kind of all over the map. Sometimes it would be these profuse, like, fits of tears
Mm-hmm.
over something like very bizarre. There was one time, I've mentioned this many times in my channel, where um, I hung out with a very good friend of mine, a female friend of mine, who she knew personally. And immediately after, she just started telling me that, like, she was she thought I was cheating on her. And I was just kind of like, what? It was just
Yeah.
completely caught me off guard. There was no evidence at all.
Yeah.
But the thing is, this had happened in my marriage. This relationship had, like, my ex-wife had also been like, are you cheating on me with this friend of yours? And so I was very adamant in the beginning of my relationship with my ex, where I said, like, she's my best friend. I've known her for years and years and years, and I'm never going to put her ahead of you. I'm never going to, like, cancel our plans
Right.
because I want to go hang out with her. But she is still important to me. And so, yeah, like, once a month, I'm going to go hang out in her backyard and just chit chat for a couple hours. And, usually her husband's hanging out there with her, and, we just kind of hang out and talk, and that's our relationship. And I basically, like, I wrote her an email, which I recognize, like, you can never do that. It never works.
There's
Um,
nothing.
no,
I
never
have
works.
iPhone
But
messages. I have like notes, you know, and everything that I
no,
tried. Yeah.
no, you have it has to be face to face conversation. Um, but I wrote her this email, just kind of, in my view, trying to just explain things in a very matter of fact way. And I got a call from her later that night, and she was crying, and, like, she couldn't talk. And so she lives like 5 minutes from my house. And so I just hung up the phone, drove straight over. And she was sobbing in her backyard. Her kids were already in bed. So I went to her backyard, and she's just profusely crying. And then she starts saying, you don't love me. You love her. You want to be with her, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just sitting there, like, it's very confusing, because in one sense, I can see that she's upset. She's sobbing, crying. But then on the other hand, I'm like, this is not connected to reality. This is not happening. Like, this is a narrative that she's creating in her mind, and nothing that she's saying is true. And some of the things that she's saying to me are very kind of demeaning, and so it's just this very strange place to be in. And then I think when that behavior turns into that intense anger, the rage, you kind of notice that same dissociation. It's like, okay, it's bizarre because it's not grounded. It's like they're feeling these intense emotions, and they have to sort of latch onto some narrative that will help them make sense of what they're
I got to
feeling.
interject right there. First, I have a question for you. Well, first, I'll
Mhm.
tell you what you said, like trying to latch onto a narrative. Um, I recall being in like kind of one of those like really heated arguments, and her saying, just like shouting out of nowhere, "You're the reason why I don't have a good relationship with my mom and grandmother." I'm like, what? Like, what are you talking about? You
Mhm.
know, your grandma,
Yeah.
and I was like, your grandmother fills up the room and doesn't let anybody, you know, have space. So it's hard for anyone to connect with you. And you told me that you had a hard relationship with your mother since you were a teenager, to the point where, you know, you met with the priest to see if you guys could like fix your relationship. And so when
Right.
I challenged her on that, um, she's like, "You're right. I, I just wanted to have something that I could come back to you with," because she was quote unquote losing the argument. And
You know,
so
I have to say that's actually a pretty rare level of self-awareness in that
it was
situation.
one of the only. This is actually really interesting because towards the end, there was like a sprinkle of, "Let me show you that I'm aware, to let you know I'm
Mhm.
getting better." And I think that's where the difference between NPD and BPD. I feel like NPD is like more intentional. Manipulations are intentional, and BPD is just like severe dysregulation. And
Yeah.
it's not saying I'm doing this because I want you to do that. Um, so it goes back to let me try this and this and this to see if I can regain control of the situation.
Mhm. I think it's a very much like a subconscious, um, just like a little bag of tools that their brains are subconsciously rooting through
Hmm.
because what's so profoundly tragic to me about it is that by far the best way for them to navigate that would just to be like, "You're right, babe. I shouldn't have done that. I'm so sorry I hurt you. How do I make this right?"
Right.
It's just like, there you go. Now you've laid the groundwork to actually start healing. But it's like the lengths that they will go
Yes.
and the cruelty, the deflection, the projection, the blame that they will engage in simply to avoid
Any
any measure of
accountability.
accountability.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That is what is so astonishing. Because especially because very often it's not accountability over anything that's like that big of a deal.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Very often it's like, hey, there's nothing really happening here. Like I see you kind of you got in your own head.
We're
And it's
all
like, hey, we've all been
imperfect.
there.
It's like not a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like I can totally accept and one of the things that I challenge myself on, just sort of recognizing that my partner had some of these sort of like BPD oriented tendencies, is I asked myself, if I were in that situation now, what would I do differently to sort of meet her where she is?
Hmm.
And I recognize that there were certain things that I could have done differently. Like, for example, one of the things that I very strongly regret is that right toward the end, she had sent me this kind of just kind of a catty, angry text. And I was upset because this had happened a number of times in our relationship. And I had a text message exchange with her from about 2 years prior at that point, where I directly asked her, please do not send me these kinds of texts. Like if like I want you to come to me, I want you to feel like we can talk about anything. If you're upset with me, it's okay. But you can't just come at me with a text. I need you to engage with me as your partner. I need to know that you care about my feelings too. And so to basically have it still happening 2 years later, there's this kind of like, kind of feeling. And what I should have done in the moment is let her know that I was upset and I wanted to talk about it later. Instead, I just didn't reply.
Yeah.
And that she internalized that as he's rejecting me, he's giving me the silent treatment. And, it was fully my intention to come back to her later and talk about it. But I look at it's that sort of thing, that kind of awareness where it's like I am empathetic to what people go through. And I don't think that just because someone has had trauma or because people struggle with this or that it makes them um, unworthy of relationships or
Yeah.
unworthy of love, and I absolutely like if my ex was willing to really turn the lens inward and work on herself to be the partner that I needed her to be, then I think that everything that she experienced was totally workable.
Right.
But it that I believe that what a lot of individuals like my ex likely experienced is that when they were growing up, being like making a mistake, getting on the wrong side of mom or dad, it wasn't just like you did something bad. It's
You
you're bad.
are bad. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And so for them to take that accountability means taking on all this just mountain of shame. And I
Hmm.
think sometimes their internal systems are not just afraid of taking on the shame that they feel about how they've treated you, but all this other shame that maybe mom and dad imposed
Yes.
upon them,
Yeah.
and so it becomes so overwhelming and terrifying to them that that's when they will start lashing out, being cruel, being condescending, lying, manipulating, all the Darvo
Yeah.
tactics to do anything to avoid accountability.
Yeah. I love that you brought up the word shame. Um, I have done some videos about this too, kind of like, and I want to ask you about that later. But kind of like how um as a survivor, the one thing that you have that abusers and the enablers don't have is that you actually have courage. The abuser and the enablers are scared shitless. They have a ton of shame, and that's why they manipulate, because they don't want that exposed. And they're counting on you to have the same level or greater shame about who you are to control you. So if you get
Yeah.
rid of that internal shame, you meet it head. There's literally nothing you can be done to control you.
Yeah.
And it's
Well, and
shame.
I noticed that, yeah, about the just kind of the way that she was speaking to me. I like, are you familiar with the Gottman Four
Yes,
Horsemen?
yes.
Okay, so contempt being
Hmm.
one of them. And for me, the contempt was the word that I kept coming back to when I was in therapy and just trying to put into words how my ex was treating me. And it was that she was always treating me as though I was beneath her
Mm,
and that I was unworthy of even just the most basic decency, compassion, kindness, understanding, acknowledgement of my reality and my feelings. And I think that all of those things are designed to make you feel shame, to
yeah.
project that shame onto you, because it's like, it's like she's the one who is frankly sabotaging the relationship. She's creating this situation out of whole cloth and destroying the relationship, but in the process she's saying, you're the one doing this, and it's because you're just a bad person, and you don't love me hard enough.
You need to
You
work
don't.
more, harder to love
Right.
me, but that milepost keeps getting moved.
Exactly, that those goalposts are always going
Yeah.
to keep getting pushed farther and farther away. So it's that really intense need to project that shame onto you, where I think, like you're saying, it's like they are trying to like it's sort of that assumption that we have, just I think as human beings, that we tend to assume that other people experience reality the same way we do.
Right, right.
That's very, very much not true. And I think that someone who has those kind of cluster B traits, they may believe that someone else experiences the same kind of shame that they do.
Mhm.
And the thing is, when you're getting all that projected on you, it's just so unfamiliar,
Yeah.
because that shame is not something that I ever felt about myself,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that's how they try to suck you into that dynamic and control you.
I think it's so interesting when you said that, sometimes as humans, we think that everybody's experiencing reality the same way we are. And that's particularly salient. I remember when we separated. So we always had kind of like tasks that we spearheaded,
Right.
depending on our skills or our time availability. And I remember when we separated, feeling just this like confusion. Is like, how do you not know what I'm capable of? We've been together for over a decade. Um, and so when it came to like child duties, that wasn't hard for me. And like, my story. I have been cooking and cleaning and doing laundry and ironing since I was 9 years old. I'm a Haitian immigrant. Like, they start you early, right?
Right.
So all those domestic things, so easy for me, never an issue for me. I mean, like, my parents were religious. We grew up Seventh-day Adventists, and every Friday before Saturday, me and my brothers would clean the house from top to bottom, right? So I've never been in a pigsty or anything like that. As a kid, each one of us had us a different day of the week to cook the meal for the week. I
Oh, I
was
love that.
I was heavily prepared to be an adult. Um, and so it was interesting to me as I observed her attempting to put burdens on me that were not burdens at all.
Interesting.
And it's like, me, all the adversity that I've gone through, and I've literally always come on top. Why do you think this is the thing that's going to sink me? Um, and it's funny. My former father-in-law said this in his speech at our wedding. uh, Talked about how amazed he was at my ability to manage adversity. And he started going through a little bit of my history. You know, when this didn't work, you joined the Marines, and then you did went to college, and da da da. So it's interesting now viewing all these little attempts to make life difficult enough for me to give up. It's just like laughable. It's laughable.
Yeah.
But what I know is back in the day, you know, men weren't the ones cooking and cleaning and stuff like that. That's your experience as a father, that you don't have the ability to do that. So you assume that that's my experience, right?
Yeah, that's
Um,
extraordinary.
and I was amazed that as soon as we separated, even though technically I had 50% more of responsibility, my life was so much easier.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
Doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So we talked a lot about kind of the dynamic. Let's talk about breaking cycles. So most
Cool.
survivors like you and I, we don't even realize that how in our uh, relationships, whether it's romantic, platonic, that we tend to replay a pattern that now I realize was just a part of me begging to be healed. Um, but it took for me like an intense amount of clarity to put me on that path of healing. So I wanted to ask you, was there a moment where it just clicked, like what you were in and that you needed to heal and separate yourself from that situation? When did you know you had to break free and chart a different path?
When I was diagnosed with PTSD. And so it was in the context of essentially like I had gone through quite a bit of therapy, but I had actually started tapering off therapy. And I was kind of in this mindset of, it's time for me to start living my life again. And so it was
So
just
this was
me trying
post
to,
separation?
correct,
Okay.
correct. So this is just me trying to make friends again, just get out of the house more because I was very isolated when I was healing, or when I was not healing, but really in the midst of
Yeah.
a lot of those really intense emotions and grief. Just me trying to get out more. I started dating, and I just started running into all kinds of emotions that I were just radically unfamiliar to me. And so, for example, I was dating this woman who, incidentally, 2 years later, after about a month, we were like not for each other, but we're still friends. Like 2 years later, which I think is awesome. Um, but when we were dating, like it was great. Like we had great rapport. She was very communicative, very intentional. All the kind of things that I look for when I'm dating someone. And my nervous system was going absolutely haywire.
Mm.
Like I was constantly like catastrophizing. I was hypervigilant. I was like not sleeping well. If like there was one day when she had been out of town and we had talked prior and she was like, I'm going to be back in town around this time. Maybe we could do something that evening, go out to dinner. And I was like, yeah, that works great. Just let me know. So she texted me about like 30 minutes prior to when she had told me she would, which I thought was awesome. And she was like, hey, just to let you know, I'm about an hour out from town. And I said, hey, no problem. And I said, I've got a photo shoot coming up. Why don't I just text you when I'm done? And she said, that sounds great. So I did the photo shoot, talked to her or texted her and got no response.
Mm.
And I didn't hear from her for like 5 hours. And like during that 5 hours, my brain went to all the dark
Sure.
places. And, like she's just looking for a reason to reject me and all the things. And then like I had to sort of talk myself through it like, okay, what do I really know? What's going on? And fortunately, by that point, I had enough therapy to understand that what I was feeling was abnormal. And I sort of said, okay, this is what I need to do to kind of work through these emotions. And then she texted me at like 8 o'clock and she was like, oh my God, she had been leading a retreat for the whole weekend. And she was like, I am so sorry. I got home and like, I've just been working so hard the whole past week. I just crashed and slept. Can we reschedule for like, tomorrow? And I was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
totally. And I realized, it was no big deal. but just the way that my brain had gone absolutely haywire. And that was something that my therapist really caught on to. But when I was deconstructing my abusive relationship, I didn't just deconstruct that relationship, because the other part of it is not just what happened in this relationship, but why was I drawn to her?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
what were and what do my previous relationships say about me as well? And so I went back through all the 5 or so long-term relationships that I've been in and just kind of tried to understand that dynamic.
If this podcast speaks to you, if you're on the path of healing, reclaiming your voice, or just trying to piece together who you really are after surviving the unthinkable, I want to invite you into a space where you don't have to do it alone. Join our Facebook group created for survivors, cycle breakers, and people rebuilding themselves from the inside out. In there, we go deeper. Weekly prompts, live streams, raw conversations, and a whole lot of people who just get it. No pretending, no pressure, just truth, growth, and community. Search Rising from the Shadows, The Path to Reclaiming You on Facebook, or hit the link in the show notes to join the community.
And it took a lot of reflecting and processing. My father passed away from Alzheimer's last year. In his passing, that kind of gave me an opportunity to really reflect more on my own childhood and some of his behaviors and some of my experiences, like being bullied. And over time, I started to see this thread. Like, I never imagined myself, Marlon, as someone who would have childhood trauma. But as I started working through, I started saying, I did. My material needs were always met, and my mother was always there for me. And I think she's the reason why I'm not a lot more messed up.
Mm.
But there were a lot of issues with my dad. There were issues with my brother. There were issues with my peers at school. And I experienced a lot of traumatic things that made me socially isolate, that made it difficult for me to have friendships, that made it difficult for me to have romantic relationships. And it was that whole process of unpacking all of that and realizing, if I am going to break this cycle, then I'm going to have to get to the root of what was driving me toward these unhealthy dynamics in the first place, and what can I do? Because I know that, like, it's kind of funny, because I did a photo shoot once with this woman who identified as a borderline, and like, she and I, we did it was about a 40-minute photo shoot, and then we probably talked for like almost 4 hours.
Oh, well.
And like, and I'm like, as she left, I was sort of like, man, I was like madly attracted to this woman. And there's that part of me,
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, there it is. Like, there's that part of my brain that is just really drawn to a certain personality. And so what's funny is that through this process of healing, and especially in the last like 6 months. So I haven't done I stopped therapy, like I had a little drop in over the summer. And then it was, believe it or not, the combination of starting my TikTok channel and starting ballet that were just like radical changes in how I was able to regulate my emotions, how I felt about the situation, what I knew about the situation. And I noticed that who I was attracted to started to shift. And it was funny, because I was having a chat with Chat GPT one night, and I asked it to tell me, like, here's this woman who I find really, really attractive, and these are all the things that I find attractive about her. And it's like, what does it say about me that I'm attracted to this woman? And Chat GPT comes back with, well, Michael, it sounds like you're attracted to her because she embodies all of the qualities that you have been cultivating through your recovery. It's compassion, it's calm. Like, I am not like, I think that when we're drawn to sort of the borderline archetype, we're drawn to that. This is true of narcissistic archetypes as well, that idealization, that sort of like really intense passion and almost like fairy tale like love. And we almost measure how right someone feels for us by how intense that feeling of connection is. And that just doesn't there's just none of that in me anymore.
Mm.
And so the last woman that I just found myself very attracted to was someone who I met in real life. And it was funny because she was someone I met at ballet. And it was funny because she has a little girl who's in the youth school there. And I showed up for class one night and I see her there. She's consoling her daughter. Her daughter's crying. And she comes around the corner. We're all waiting to go in the studio for class. And there were a couple other women there. And they say, well, what was wrong? Why was she upset? And she says, oh, her teacher made her do all this in front of the class. She was really embarrassed. Um, and one of the women said something like, yeah, kids need to learn. It's not that big of a deal
Mm.
or something. And that just
Yeah.
just did not sit right with me, you know? And then this woman who I'm quite fond of, the mother, says, I know, but at that age, it is their whole world. And I was just
Right.
like,
Yeah.
that was like so attractive to me. And I realized that it is that calm. It is that sense of ease and safety rather than that sense of intensity and excitement that
Yeah.
draws me toward someone today.
That I am so happy to hear that I can relate about um, being drawn to the maladaptive behaviors. I think for me, um, because of the way I grew up, fairly isolated. I was homeschooled. Um,
Mhm.
we were raised in a cult, so that also isolated us. And I think I grew up with this chip on my shoulder that, like, I'm gonna show the world that I'm worth it. All you people who have discounted me my entire life. So I think romantically, I was attracted to the prize, right? Like
Yeah,
what does this say about me, or or the chase in a way, but not like the chase of like a whole bunch of women, but the chase of the relationship and to be loved and to build something. Um, all of that was so. Now I can see that that was that was driving. Um, it's not a big surprise. I'm an entrepreneur. I have to do sales for work.
right.
And I too enjoy being in a sales call and asking the right question to get somebody to, share with what their problem is, to the point
Yeah,
where I can, share my solution, etc. It's fun. Like it feels weird to say it's entertaining
as
for me,
a
but
fellow entrepreneur,
okay.
I relate to that
Yeah,
profoundly
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel, and because I have confidence, I've always had confidence in my ability to communicate. It didn't feel like I was giving up any part of myself to fight for the relationship, right? It felt like I was communicating in the relationship,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah,
That's a big one. But I think that we often don't realize how much we are trotting over our own boundaries
yes,
to fight for the
yeah,
relationship, or boundaries that we should have erected in the first
mhm,
place that we just didn't know that we should have put up.
right,
So yeah, a lot of the sort of fight that I had in me to try to keep communicating with my ex after in the aftermath of the discard.
mm,
A lot of it is just why, and a lot of my attitude toward her was really trying to make it clear, like, I'm not trying to ask you to come back to me. This is not me. Like, if you want to leave, like, like then that's what you should do. My love is not a prison. But I feel like when you're with someone for years, and especially when that person has very close relationships with your children, that if it is time for you, or if the relationship is not working for you, that has to be communicated with your partner.
right,
You don't just like cast them out and then just say, well, I don't want to talk about it. I
hmm,
don't have anything to say to you.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
I feel like you owe someone that courtesy.
yeah. Totally agree. That's the other part, right? Just kind of like bottling things up until it explodes, and then
Mhm.
the one person is like, where is this coming from?
And
And
I wonder about that in that sort of dark triad archetype. I wonder how much of it is really bottling things up and how much of it is just sort of almost this natural um, nervous system cycle. If we
right,
think about like the body keeps the score,
yeah,
all their trauma is just living in their body, living in this perpetually dysregulated nervous system. And when like I made a video pretty recently on my TikTok where I was saying that for someone who is prone to these kinds of behaviors, it is the moments of calm. It is exactly like that dynamic that I am attracted to now. Those times when the relationship is just like you're not in this like swept away a romantic passion and you're not butting heads and
yeah,
arguing. It's the middle where everything is just day to day life. You're just doing life together, sharing in experiences, putting the kids to putting the kids to bed, and making dinner together, and just doing all your just
yeah,
everyday things. That's when their nervous system goes absolutely haywire,
mhm,
because it is that calm and that safety that they learned not to trust.
yeah,
And I don't think that they have an awareness, but it's, when they were growing up, it's part of their brain knew that every time it was calm, one of these days, dad's going to walk in
mhm,
and he's going to be raging mad. Mom's going to, break something or yell at me or something like that. And so like what my ex used to say to me, she said a couple of things that now looking back, they make so much more sense. She would frequently say, "I'm so happy with you that I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop."
uh,
It's like that's hypervigilance, right? She just has this intangible feeling that something is bad. I can't really be this good. I'm gonna show myself to be just like all the other men at some point,
yeah.
you know?
You had a
And
video on your page that you were talking about, you know, uh, people don't realize it, but people with these personality disorder, they're operating at a high level of anxiety.
very much.
Can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
more about that?
Yeah, and that's exactly where that anxiety lies, because that cycle of abuse, the idealization and devaluation behaviors, are attempts by them to regulate their anxiety. And what I think is interesting is that, like, the butterfly feelings, when you're meeting someone and you're just crazy about them and you're falling in love, those butterflies are anxiety. And a lot of that idealization is their attempt to just be so swept away in all these positive feelings that they can kind of push that anxiety way, way down and not feel it. And the same thing with devaluation. They have all this anxiety about the relationship, but by provoking you and getting you to sort of fight for them, fight the
Yes,
relationship
yes,
or the relationship, and maybe, just maybe, change your behavior. Maybe you erode a little bit more of your autonomy,
mm,
of your life outside of
yes,
the relationship, to become a little bit more enmeshed each time there's a conflict like that. You just you just lose a little bit more of yourself, but that is an attempt by them. It's a subconscious need for control. But what they're trying to do is calm that anxiety. And so that's why you'll so often see, like everybody who I've ever talked to who has experienced devaluation behaviors, one of the common threads is it just comes out of nowhere. It's like everything seemed like it was fine. Like, yeah, babe, we were just like on vacation and just had a great time together. And you were just telling me yesterday how much you love me and everything's going great. And now she's just like completely losing it. And you just kind of go, wait a second, I thought isn't isn't everything fine? Like, what's this really about? And so those kinds of those kinds of patterns start creating, ironically, it starts creating that same anxiety in us,
yeah,
and we start losing our sense of safety when we have those sort of calm and quiet moments with our partners,
yeah,
because then we start knowing that it's just a matter of time before the devaluation behaviors start to come in. And that is what is so difficult, I think, like when you were asking me before about breaking the cycle, it's like when we get out of these kinds of relationships, we have started to be a little bit conditioned,
Yeah.
not ourselves, not to trust that calm and that quiet and that safety. And that I think is very difficult to kind of work through, especially since, a lot of times we're single
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's like, until you're really starting to connect with other people and confront those feelings, it can be hard to understand what exactly you were going through and how to heal it.
You just shot me through back to 2013 when you said, um, and essentially that they generate situations to have you fight for them in order to calm their anxiety.
Yes.
Um, I had no awareness of what was going on back then. It was still very early on in our relationship. And I remember that she was over my apartment, and I don't know what argument we had. But she was at college that time, so on the weekends she would bring her laundry basket and things like that. So she packed up all her things, in her laundry basket, and she started walking out the door. I did not chase after her. At that time, I had a fairly high level of self confidence. I was doing well in the Marine Corps. I had been meritoriously promoted a couple of times. I was well respected. I had money. I had prospects, things like that. So I did not feel the need to like run after her, and she stopped before even going out the door and said exactly that, like you're not even gonna come after me and like ask me to stay. And I'm like, if you want to go, you can go. Like, and I realized that that was one of the tests. Now I realize that that was one of the tests. And this will go to something else. You talked about learned helplessness and parentification, but that was
Yeah.
one of her. That was like kind of an onboarding test to see if I will accept the parentification of her feelings, um, and then it
That's
right,
really accurate.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the reverse about my own anxiety about the not feeling good about the calm is when I realize that because I'm very intuitive, or maybe let's just call it hypervigilant. When I cannot read somebody, it just gives me like so much anxiety. And it's not like I'm actively trying to read them, but when I realize I'm not getting data in an interaction, that is what kind of makes me work even harder to understand like what's going on, to
Yeah.
sell
Yeah. Yeah.
myself to them or what have you. And in those
Yeah.
moments, before I started doing the work, that was like my obsession, to prove to you that I am deserving of your attention, your respect, um your smiles, like whatever, right?
I
um
think that is so deeply played into that abusive dynamic. And I remember there was a time, this would have been like fall of 2021. And so around this time, I was coaching her son's soccer team, very heavily involved in her life and her kids' lives. I mean, aside from us not cohabitating, we were very much, doing life together. And I remember one time, just kind of out of the blue, I get this sort of long text from her, and she is basically telling me that she just feels like I don't really want to be around her and the kids, and that she's just not really sure if I really want this relationship and all this kind of stuff. And I remember this sort of mix of like where's this coming from, but also having the self-awareness to recognize that it wasn't about me.
mhm.
And I think that that happened actually several times in the relationship. And so what I would do is, like, in that situation, I said, okay, let's start a couple of things. I said, how about if like every Tuesday night, she would always have the kids on Tuesday. And I said, Tuesday night's game night. Let's just make it like family night. We just every Tuesday we'll do something as a family. And then we also agreed that every other Sunday when she had the kids, we would do like a family breakfast. And like that really went a long way. And it was after the relationship that I started to realize that in fact, when you are partnered with someone who has that kind of anxiety, it is exactly those kinds of ritual that help them navigate their anxiety.
Right.
But what very often happens is that if you don't have the wherewithal to identify that and say, okay, here's what I can do, and I can, let's work on creating this new ritual, and maybe that will help you to navigate that. But if it's just always like reacting to their reactivity,
Yeah. Yeah.
then you just get stuck in this perpetual cycle where it's like everything seems like it's fine.
Hmm.
And then one day you're getting raked over the coals for not loving me hard enough,
Right.
not showing up as much as I want you to. Do you really love me? Do you really want this relationship? And it's like, man, the speed at which they can tumble down that rabbit hole is kind of
Yeah.
shocking. It can literally be like, you know, well, I sent you a text earlier today and, you didn't respond. And, because you didn't respond, maybe I'm just not important to you. And if I'm not important to you, maybe this relationship's not important to you. And in the back of your mind,
So
you're thinking
where did
like,
this come from?
yeah. And I'm just like, I saw your text. I was with a client and I forgot to reply. Like, but like in their mind, they will just tumble so quickly to this very, very, very dark
And
place.
meanwhile, they won't give you the courtesy of assuring your anxieties about the relationship. It's one way. You
That's the point of creation.
that yes. You what you said, it just like brought me back to 2021, or end of no 2020. I started my business. 2021 was a rough year. The pandemic,
For all of us.
and I was trying to start a business in that time, a financial advising business at that. Um, and and during that time, I had a lot of guilt about making my family struggle financially for me to work on my silly dream, right?
Right.
So when my partner at the time was, saying like, I don't see enough of you, blah, 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 I need more time. It just felt like a very valid request, right? And I'm like, I'm working 14-hour days. I'm trying to, build on whatever momentum we have. Um, what do you need from me? I would like that if we could even just like watch TV together. We both loved like Bravo TV, so Real
Yeah.
Housewives and stuff like that. I'm like, I can do that. I started coming home like no later than 6, and then we would sit on the couch, watch the TV, and I wasn't allowed to talk to her. I would be like trying to engage with her, like not in some random stuff and like what we're watching and stuff like that. Like, what do you think? Do you think she's this? Da 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 da.
Right, right.
And that was annoying to her. So I literally had to just sit there, and she watched TV, and but I wasn't allowed to engage, and that was so
Yeah, that was
weird to me.
kind of like that kind of reminds me of something that, that my ex sort of I felt like put on me where she would say, I want you here meaning at her house with her kids. I want you here all the time or as much as possible. And then she might also say something like, I want you to be present. Like, I want you to be engaged with us, And so it's like, so I'm supposed to be there all the time. And I'm always supposed to be on, always supposed to be engaged. And you kind of look back on that and you go, okay, but do you forget that I am my own person too? I have my own life, my own stressors, my own needs.
So I never even
And
thought like that about like I'm my own person. So like while I was trying to meet her needs, everything you're
mhm.
saying right there, it wasn't in my head that was even a thing.
Yeah, I don't think at the time when I
Okay,
was in the relationship, it didn't even cross my mind.
okay, okay.
Yeah, in fact, I thought she was expressing a
Reasonable.
reasonable
Yes, yes.
anxiety. And I thought that just as her loving partner, like I wanted to ease that for her. I wanted to make her feel better. And, I think sometimes where I would start like with the Tuesday and Sunday rituals, that's me sort of recognizing that like her just coming to me and saying I want more doesn't really help me out. what does more look like?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. And a lot of times I don't think they know.
Right.
And have you ever heard the acronym HALT?
What is it?
HALT, HALT.
No.
So it actually comes out of like abuse, like substance abuse recovery. Um, but a good friend of mine who's actually diagnosed borderline told me that her therapist had used this with her. And if you are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, you need to take a step back before you go to your person
Yeah.
and bring them these things, because those four emotions, especially loneliness, I feel like is an emotion that it is very natural for us to feel like it is someone else's job
Hmm.
to fix that feeling. But all of those things put us in a, a precariously regulated place where we can just fall off so easily.
If you're an event organizer, HR leader, or educator looking to bring a powerful voice to your stage, someone who speaks truth, ignites momentum, and empowers your audience to rise above what's held them back, then I want to talk to you. My keynote, Rising from the Shadows, is more than a talk. It's a transformative experience that shows people how to stop shrinking, start healing, and stand fully in their story. I've lived it, I teach it, I walk people through it. So if you're building a lineup of speakers who don't just talk but move people, head over to marlonwesh.com to create something unforgettable for your audience.
And so it's so important to have that self-awareness to be like, okay, I'm feeling a certain way. You know what? I'm gonna go work out.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then I'll feel better. I was talking to someone the other day, and they were he was talking about his mother, who is sort of like a textbook borderline. She's like almost 80, but remarkably, she still like shows really intense borderline like
Oh,
tendencies. And he was saying that, she would have this huge emotional reaction to something. And then literally what he could do is he could say like, his daughter might say like, "Oh, hey grandma, you want to go shopping with me?" And she's, "Oh, okay." And all that dysregulation just stops.
yeah.
And it makes me think of my ex's youngest daughter when she was like 5, 6 years old. And, she could just be having like the biggest like kind of tantrum. And then you're just like, "Hey, shiny thing over
Yeah,
here." And they
yeah.
just kind of go, "Well," and the tears
Yep.
just immediately stop. And it's really kind of bizarre
Which is a
to
good
see
point because uh, people with these disorders tend to be stuck at a developmental age.
that that's exactly it. Yeah. And so that's where I was going with that. It's so bizarre to see that kind of dynamic happening in an adult.
Right.
And I think that it's not normal for us to see that dynamic in an adult. And so we want to sort of approach it as just like a normal adult circumstance. But we don't realize that we are being parentified
Right.
in the moment, that they are placing us as being responsible for their emotional
Yeah.
state. And if we can't meet that burden, then that's when we become devalued and discarded.
You say something in another video. I went down a tangent on your page, and I was like, "You're the only person." I've been saying this and I think in some of my earlier episodes when I go into NPD and kind of like the cycle of it. But
Mhm.
I haven't heard other creators or professionals use this specific phrase, plausible deniability. And
Okay.
you saying that like these requests just seem reasonable. I'm like, yes, like there is nothing like a huge red flag that's like, no one's asking you to jump off a bridge to show me you love me, right? Like that's not happening.
Right.
So asking to spend more time with me, that's reasonable, right? Um,
Right.
asking, because I was in my business and maybe you had some anxiety about how much money I will be earning, so you want me to print out a list every week of every single sales conversation that I have and what's the potential like pipeline. That seems reasonable, right? But it just kept going. Like, how do I assuage your anxiety? How do I assuage your anxiety? Um, and then when you talked about halt and especially the loneliness, it made me remember I was having a scheduled meeting with someone. My partner knew what time it was. We had agreed to meet for lunch or something like that later on in the day. She was home that day. I'm in the meeting. My phone is going off. My phone is going off. I glance my phone to see what's going on. I'm not getting any texts or voicemails. So I'm like, if there's an emergency, you're gonna try different ways to like get a hold of me, right? But none of that happened. Once I finally got out of the meeting and reached out, it was a complete meltdown about like, I was trying to call you. I'm like, you knew I had this meeting. I was not available. Um, and after it was all sifted through, she just wanted to change our plans. Is what she admitted. Like she wanted to meet at a different time. That was it. That was the
Yeah,
only reason.
it's right, right. And when you really cut through, like to go back to the time when she was crying, saying that I wanted to be with this other woman. We subsequently 2 days later took a trip out of state, just a little overnight, um, and it was about a 4-hour car drive each way. And so during the car ride, we talked through that whole situation. And one of the things that I do regret is that I didn't push harder for an apology for accusing me of cheating on her.
Yeah.
Um, but when I really kind of sifted through what she was feeling, it literally came down to her being like, I'm just really insecure about her. And, because she's like, my friend is like, she's super fit, she's very attractive, and she's just like, I just have like she's like, my ex-husband cheated on me, and I just, with a friend,
Mm,
and she's like, I have a lot of anxiety about that relationship. And she's like, I know that it's not you, that it's me. I would just kind of appreciate, like, it was a photo shoot that I had done with that friend, and it just happened very suddenly, because like she and I were talking one day, and I was like, why don't you come over tomorrow? We'll do the photo shoot. She's like, okay. And my friend was, or my partner was like, I would just appreciate a little bit more heads up in the future. And I was like, okay. That in itself, I feel like, is a totally reasonable
yep,
ask.
yep.
And if in the beginning she had just come to me and said like, hey baby, I don't mind that you did the photo shoot and everything, but just like, I just want to, gently remind you here that like I do struggle with this like insecurity. Like, in the future, would you mind just like giving me a little more heads up about those photo shoots? And I would have been like, oh my God, yes, I'm so sorry that I didn't, take that into account. But it was this whole other performance
Hmm.
that honestly created a lot of damage from her inability to sort of just ground those feelings in the moment, and her need to sort of like I said, create this performance to engage me so that I
Yeah,
would soothe her.
yeah. Soothe. That's a great word. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. That's something my therapist said. Um, I remember expressing frustration that when during that final devaluation, when she was just like absolutely laying into me and saying all this horrible stuff, I ended up apologizing. And it's like, I'm so sorry, like this, I've been really busy with this, and I didn't mean for that to get in the way of us, blah blah blah. And I was talking to my therapist, I was like, that was ridiculous. I had no reason to apologize. I had nothing to apologize for. I hadn't done anything wrong. And my therapist just, she says, you were trying to soothe her.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, that's exactly what I had adopted this strategy where if I was the first to apologize, then it would very often like take her down enough that we could start to have a conversation.
Mm.
And it's only kind of looking back going, yeah, but that's stupid.
Yeah,
There's no reason that I should just be the default person to apologize. It's like sometimes it's her,
yeah, yeah.
like
It's
sometimes it is me.
unrealistic that one person is always the one accountable. It's just unrealistic, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
We are getting towards the end of this. I mean, we could go on forever and ever. Um, Beginning healing is not just like one day you come out, you're healed. I love the idea that small consistent steps can create profound change over time. Can you share a specific habit or action you committed to that seemed small at first, but had a massive impact on your confidence and healing? I know you mentioned ballet. I'd love to hear about that.
That's exactly where I'm going. Ballet. So in January of last year, 2024, I have loved ballet for years. I go to Tulsa has a phenomenal company, and so I've gone to just about every performance for years and years. And it was a friend of a friend who's like this woman in her 50s, and she posts on Facebook. She's like, always wanted to be a dancer, never had the opportunity. Here I am in like my uh, first ever beginning ballet class at like 50 something years old. And I went, that's a thing? You can do that? I just thought that if you didn't start as a child,
Right.
the ship had sailed. And so I had just missed the first semester by like 2 weeks.
Mm.
And so I said, since I don't have any dance experience, I'm just going to wait till the fall. And so I started in September of last year. And I thought, so I've been in the fitness industry for 20 years. Photography is kind of my semi-pro, passion project. But the fitness industry, personal training is where my bread has been for the last 20 years. And so I've done all kinds of, like, I've coached powerlifting at the national level. I personally practiced Olympic weightlifting for about 10 years.
Wow.
And I was just really having a hard time going to the gym and I knew cognitively that physical fitness was really important, but I just couldn't connect with that kind of exercise. And I sobbed on the drive home from my first ballet class because it was such an incredibly empowering experience. First of all, I was immediately struck by like, oh, this is one of the most difficult things that I'm ever going to do.
Mm.
And it has been, like, in terms of how it's pushed my body, it's orders of magnitude harder than anything I've ever tried to do. But just the way that my teacher approached the class, like I credit my teacher, Chelsea, with just really helping draw me in, because she has us all close our eyes. And then she asks, who has this much experience, who has never taken any dance before. And from there, she builds this just very safe, positive environment where she encourages us, like, you're going to forget the combos, you're going to lose your balance, like, but if you think you might have it, go for it. If you fail, it's just information. And she said, we're all at different levels, and all you have to do is come in and try. And so she never had to create that sort of stereotypical harsh ballet environment for me to feel like she was a tough teacher, because I felt like she was a teacher who pulled the best out of me. And so there was never a single time, like, if I'm going to go for a pirouette or something, if, she might say, if you want to go for the pirouette, do it. If you just want to do a balance, you can do that. And if there was, in my mind, even like a 1 out of 50 chance that maybe I'll get that pirouette, I was like, I'll go for it.
Yeah.
And it was just that systemically, like, setting all these small goals and overcoming them, and seeing the changes in my body, like the things that I can do now, even in just my day-to-day life, how I feel. It's just dramatic. I can't believe how much stronger and more flexible and more graceful my movements are. But more than that, ballet is such a profound movement practice, which I feel, more than anything I've ever done, helps me regulate my nervous system. And I still have to manage my PTSD symptoms. And whenever I am in those days where it's like it's so hard for me to get going, ballet is always the thing that pulls me out of it. I could do a 30, 40-minute bar, and I'll just be like ready to face whatever comes at me, and it's just this, because it calms me, it centers me. I feel in control. I feel empowered. And ballet, because it encompasses such a huge pantheon of technical minutia, there's always something. Every class is telling you something like, hey, you did pretty well at this. This you really did not. So what if we just worked on this, or just work on this little movement? You know, your turnout is slipping a little bit when you move this way. What if we just focused on engaging these muscles here and just practice that motion? And over time, you just see all these changes in your capability, and the confidence that it has given me has just been incredible. And it's like I sort of feel like the, you know, like the vegan CrossFitter, where it's like you cannot get me to shut up about how awesome
Mm,
ballet is. But it was truly that, along with, like I said, starting the TikTok, where I just heard other people's stories and realized that I was not alone,
yeah.
and um, I had so much in common with even people who had in so many ways radically different experiences. Women who had experienced domestic violence still coming to me and saying, um, "Yeah, I got that too."
Yeah.
That those two things. It was like making the decision to explore this new territory. I think I should also say with ballet, there's a huge aspect of it, especially as a man. To like, I was the only guy
Hmm.
for both semesters. There's probably like 3 dozen women, but it was like these are women of all ages and backgrounds and abilities. And like I made so many friends
Yeah.
in class, and it was just like just a way for me to get out of, I guess, maybe like stereotypically male dominated places and challenge myself in a new environment, challenge me to make new friends and things. So I would always go early and stay a little bit late just so I could talk with some people. And it ended up just being like the highlight of my week every week, to just go chat with the friends that I was making, have this really positive experience, and then go home feeling like that was amazing.
I love that. I love that. Hold on one second, and I'm going to edit out this part. I
Mhm.
realize my computer's not plugged in and it's dying.
Oh, you're fine.
All right, I'm back.
All right, there we
I love what you said about that. One of the small things that I started doing was taking care, finding ways to kind of introduce luxury in my life, or something that. And one of the things that I do about once a month, I get a mani pedi.
I love that.
Yeah, I get, and I do clear gel. Um, you know, and again, right, like every time you're in there, there's somebody like looking at you crazy or what have you. Um, but it just feels so validating, when you feel you look clean, you look good, you're presentable, and it just increases your sense of self-worth. And those are some of the little things that helped me, um, kind of regulate my nervous system. I love a good suit. Like any chance I can get to wear a suit, like that makes me feel good.
It's so funny you say that because I only have a few suits. And being in the fitness industry, I mean, my dress code is basically like, you know, what do they call it? Like athleisure,
Mhm.
basically. And so it's rare that I have the opportunity to use a suit. But like if I go to a ballet performance, like you better believe I'm putting on a
Yeah,
suit. It's just that whole
yeah.
ritual of just, yeah, I love it.
I went to the symphony last Christmas. They were doing the Boston Pops. They were doing Handel's Messiah, and me and a friend that went there. So like I wore my tux there, like made it like a little
Yeah.
fancy thing, and it's just great. It's just great. We could go, we could go on forever, forever,
I don't
forever.
feel like we
But we
scratched the surface.
Yeah, but we have to take this to a close. This conversation has been incredible, and I know that our listeners are going to walk away with much insight and inspiration. So much of what you said resonated with me. Big part of that is, you know, abusers are not particularly unique. They seem to all follow a certain pattern. So it's very validating to hear someone else um, not just say, I was hurt, but it's like the exact same way. Felt like I was alone for so long. And honestly, what really helped me, I went down a rabbit hole um, listening to other women and their like relationship issues. And then I realized,
Same.
oh, wait, this is happening to me. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it's so important that we as men show up because we were talking about it before the recording that this is kind of one of uh the real harms that patriarchy brings, right? It subjugates women, but in
Mhm.
turn it also subjugates men
Absolutely.
to a place where they're no longer human, right? You're not able to express feelings. You're supposed to be this stoic. If I have to hear Marcus Aurelius one more time by some
Dude,
stoic,
if one more red pill bro starts talking about stoicism,
it's like wait, it's like better to be a warrior in a garden instead of a gardener in a war. It's like
yeah,
stop,
exactly.
stop. Um,
Stop.
but consequence of that is often men aren't believed when they're harmed, and there's this presupposition that men are always the aggressor. I'm sure it's a lot less than women,
Sure.
just the way
Well,
our
especially when it comes to physical abuse and
right,
those maybe more sociopathic behaviors.
right. But when no physical abuse is done, like then it's like, you know, happy wife, happy life. There's all these idioms and that we
Well, there's a woman, the woman that I mentioned who was beaten to the point of a brain bleed, imprisoned. I posted a video where I was talking about my journey in learning to use the language of survivor to describe myself.
yes,
And for a long time, I didn't think that what I had experienced was worthy of that title. Exactly because I would see these women
yeah,
and they're like, they're showing the bruises and or it's like a legal
hmm,
thing after the relationship. And it's just like they just get
yeah,
put through absolute hell. And I go like, okay, well, I didn't have to go through any of that. So I guess what I experienced wasn't that bad. But then I think about how far it pushed me and how deeply it wounded me and how much it has affected my life. And it was actually that woman who was the first comment on that video. And she said, Michael, you are a survivor.
oh well,
And to hear her, who had gone through so much, validate me in that way it was profound
yeah.
to me.
What a gift! What a gift!
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Last question: what does thriving look like to you now, and how does it differ from how you defined it before your journey of healing?
Really good question, Marlon. So I moved very quickly from my divorce to my abusive relationship. It was only about 5 months. I've now been single for over 3 years. And what I feel that I have done that I never really had in my life is I have built a life for myself, a peace that I truly treasure and enjoy. And it's not in isolation. I don't believe that being single means that I don't have community or
Right.
friends or connection. Um, but what it means too is that in the event that I connect with someone, it's it's I know that I am going to want to preserve the autonomy that I've created for myself. And whereas for me before, so much of my validation was external.
Yes.
And I think so much of what I looked for in relationships and why I was drawn to a lot of those behaviors is exactly because, like, for example, and this might be TMI for the audience, but I'm going to go there, is in my marriage toward the end, I was sort of, I felt blamed for um, our lackluster love life.
Mm,
And when I started dating my abusive partner, I mean, in that idealization phase, it's like she could not keep her hands off
right.
me.
Right.
And that just 180-degree turn of feeling so rejected and hurt to having this person who's just all about me just made me feel like, well, it wasn't me.
Mm-hmm.
It was my ex-wife. She was the problem. And I just latched onto it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know now with that way, like we were talking about earlier, how it's that calm and it's that peace that I find attractive. That's exactly because that's what I experience in my own life. And that's what my relationships are like now. The friends that were toxic and unhealthy for me, I just don't talk to them anymore. And I have very much kind of shifted and realigned who I allow close to me. I am much more proactive in verbalizing boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
I actually got a message from a woman um, who had seen a lot of my posts and stuff, and she said, um, "Can I vent to you about my PTSD?" And I told her no.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't tell her no in a negative way, but I was like, I'm not a mirror. I'm a sponge. And um, when other people are relating their issues to me, or coming to me to try to understand what they're going through, it's like, I appreciate that you see me as a safe person, but I have to be mindful of my own emotional load. And so the fact that I have what I see thriving as now is essentially this peaceful life where I am not searching for someone to validate me,
Wow. Nice.
because I know who I am and I know what my worth is. And when I feel misaligned, I know I have the tools to correct that misalignment, uh, through my friendships, through dance, through self-care, through a new suit, all the things that I can do to sort of realign myself that don't require me to reach for someone else to say, make me feel this way, make me feel good about myself.
Yeah. Michael, that's a perfect place to stop. I really appreciate this conversation.
I
This
really
was great.
appreciate you, Marlon.
You're welcome back
Absolutely.
anytime.
All right.
If you're listening to this and you've got a story to tell, whether it's your personal story of healing and reclaiming your voice or rising from rock bottom, or you're a professional with powerful insight into trauma, identity, resilience, or transformation, then I want to hear from you. Rising from the Shadows is more than just a podcast. It's a space where truth is honored, power is reclaimed, and stories heal. If you have something to share that could empower others to stop shrinking and start rising, I'd love for you to apply to be a guest on the show. Just head to tellmystory.risingfromtheshadows.com to submit your application. Let's rise together, one voice, one breakthrough, one story at a time.